welcome everyone to another episode of Inside CKP. I'm your host, Jeremy Como, and with me I have three distinguished gentlemen from around the world. Yeah, I lost him too. We got Jamie Ibson up on the right there. Well, my right. I don't know what y'all are looking at. Quincy J. Allen down at the bottom right, and Casey Moore's down below me. Welcome, gentlemen. I appreciate y'all coming on. Before we get into their promos, we got to pay the bills. And today we're brought to you by Chris Kennedy Publishing. And you can go to Chris Kennedy Publishing for all of your military science fiction, horror, fantasy, nonfiction, even romance needs. Not many of the romance, but we got them. Don't forget, if you want to support Chris Kennedy Publishing and this show, go to Chris Kennedy's Patreon, as well as you can find them on Amazon. Oh, slip. You can find all the books that they offer. And now back to the gentleman in front of me here. So we're going to start with Jamie. Jamie, if you would, go ahead and plug all of your tell us your name and plug all your socials.
Jamie Ibson, and you can find me on Facebook. I've got my personal page as well as Ibson Writes. My website is ibsonwrites.ca. You can find me on Twitter, same handle. And then I'm also on Amazon. You've got the link down there in the screen, and BookBub as well.
Casey?
All right, let's see. You can find me at www.caseymoores.net. You can find me on Facebook as Casey Moore's Writer. I'm Casey Moops on Instagram, Moops. That's all that's coming to me right now. I think I'm also on Twitter, but I haven't been there in a while.
You're Casey Moops on Twitter too.
Casey Moops on Twitter too. Awesome. All right.
And Quincy.
So Quincy Allen, you can find me at quincyallen.com. That also works, quincyjallen.com. On Facebook, it's Quincy Allen Author is one of the profiles. That's my personal profile. Also, QJA Books listed here, which is more that's focused on just the book stuff. You get a lot of other non-book related stuff in my personal feed, so be advised. See here, Quincy Allen. I'm also on Amazon, of course. Oh God, that YouTube channel is that's a bit dated. Although I have in there actually some playlists that I use when I'm writing certain projects, so that might be interesting for one or two people on the planet if they wanted to check that out. I believe I have a Twitter account. I haven't been on there in I don't know how long, mostly because I'm old and don't tweet. And Instagram, not so much. I think there's an account out there. I used to be IT, but now I'm just old.
All right, well, welcome, gentlemen. Thanks for coming on, and we'll do kind of a round table. Just chime in when you want. So let's see. So just let's start with Jamie. What kind of books do you write? And what can people expect from your books? No, actually, wrong question. When did you start writing? When did I start
writing? Well, I started writing about grade 2, and then I took like 30 years off.
It's a little break.
A little bit of a break. I know my folks were very proud when Jamie came home with like one of those coil bound books, not like the spiral bound, but the plastic that curls and like you hole punch the pages. I had I had a story about like a vampire bat that went around eating things. I did a grim kind of a horror story about a couple kids that decided to hike Mount McKinley and got eaten by a bear. I'm surprised they sent me to see more counselors when I was little. And then then I stopped and didn't pick it up again until after I went to LibertyCon 30 in 2017
wow.
and met Chris Kennedy himself and Rob Howell and Jason Cordova and a whole bunch of the other CKP gang. That was the first convention I'd ever gone to. And going and meeting people in real life and talking to them in real life suddenly made it sound like it was a whole lot more viable than I'd ever really considered. And so, some of the people that I talked to at the convention, they were putting together little anthologies, and I started writing short stories and went from there.
Cool. Quincy, when did you start writing, and what kind of stuff do you write?
Well, like Jamie, I was writing as a kid. I mean, I wrote a story about, it was alien spiders in volcano pits on a distant planet. That must have been like the 4th grade. Kids loved it. So I always wanted to be a writer. However, my dad, who was born in 1929, literally the month of the Great Depression when it started, right? September. He has a very different take on what one should do with your life, and that doesn't include writing. So I grew up hearing, what, do you want to be a starving writer the rest of your life? And I listened closely to that, to my chagrin. Got into web design and web and IT stuff and did that for 20-some years. Got laid off in 2009 and realized, you know what, I could be a jerk the rest of my life and earn pretty good money in IT, because IT does it too. Or I could be a starving artist and die happy. So I decided to go the starving artist route. That was 2009, and I have to date written, 10 novels, probably 40 to 60 short stories in print in one form or another, a bunch of anthologies with CKP. I write literally everything, well, almost. I tried romance, I couldn't. That was just a little awkward. Science fiction, fantasy, horror, paranormal, steampunk, noir. My short fiction is literally all over the board, and then my novels range from post-apocalyptic sci-fi to military sci-fi to thriller, and then ultimately fantasy and steampunk on the other end. So I'm all over the board. Mostly ADHD, I think, is why I do that.
Wow. And you, all of y'all are y'all been published with several publishers, right? Or
yes, I have.
And yeah, that's what I thought. Hey, Casey, how about you? When did you know you wanted to be a writer and all that good stuff?
Same thing. I was writing as a kid. Thinking back while the other two were talking, I realized that sometime around like the 2nd or 3rd grade, a friend and I drew this picture of this monster, and for some reason we thought it would be a lot scarier if it had lots and lots of eyes, lots and lots of mouths. Give me 1 second.
Shoggoth.
Yeah, right.
Lots of
Cthulhu
arms.
lives.
So, and then on the back of the big old poster board that we drew this monster on, I wrote this story about that monster. And then it just sort of became a thing. That was sort of my thing through elementary school, was that I was the kid who wrote stories. That sort of tapered off around high school. I wrote a few stories while I was at the academy. But then for pretty much my entire Air Force career, I went into pilot training. I was a rescue and special ops C-130 pilot. And during pretty much all of that time, I didn't really write for most of my career. And I have to apologize right now. The only place I could find internet on this note right now was on a street that's busier than I thought it was when I camped out. And if I go hide out in my car, I lose the connection. So I'm sorry about that. But anyway.
We can't hear him. It's all good, man. Just roll.
Yeah, we can't hear the traffic at all.
Happy to have you.
So yeah, my entire Air Force career, I pretty much stopped writing. And then about the time I was getting to retire a few years back, back in 2002, 2003, I used to do a few things back and forth with Girl Casey in Vampire Masquerade, because we had this LARP and we wrote stories for that, and then we did some back and forth from that based on our characters. But then I stopped writing. Around 2018, I was getting close to retirement. Girl Casey says, "What do you want to do when you get out?" ... Hey, would you like to start writing? In that way that she does. Hey. Then I was still in a very busy squadron with a very high ops tempo. And even then I was sort of like, no, I don't think this is something I can do. But then I left my last operational assignment, came back to the States, was in a training schoolhouse. Things slowed down a little bit, and realized I had some time. I went to LibertyCon because she had an extra ticket, and then saw everything that she had done, produced, and developed. And then I think it was DragonCon 2018 when I had found out she had written a whole bunch in the Four Horsemen universe. I started getting interested in what that was. I had just read Cartwright's Cavaliers on the way to DragonCon 2018. I went to the DragonCon 2018 panel. Sitting in that panel, I crafted this story in my head. I came home from that weekend. I wrote it in a couple days. And then it just sort of, the dam had burst, and I've been writing for the last few years since then. I got 5 novels right now. I think about 15-ish short stories, though I'm starting to lose track. And I've actually got another novel on deck that's I'm just waiting for a word back from the publisher. So, yeah.
Cool.
That's pretty much it. That's where I am now.
So going back to Jamie, how did you kind of talked about it a little bit, but how did you become a part of CKP, and what do you I don't think you talked about like what type of stuff you wrote.
Okay, so stuff that I write, the term that I heard getting tossed around that I think is kind of funny is genre fluid, where it doesn't matter what genre you're working in so long as the story you're telling is fun. So like the novels that I've published right now, I co-wrote one with Moops. I co-wrote one with Jason Cordova. Those two are military sci-fi in Four Horsemen universe. My first solo novel was in Christopher Woods's post-apocalyptic Fallen World series, Pacific Shogun, set on the islands northwest of Seattle. Then I wrote Herbicide, which is, I've been told by the cyberpunk community it doesn't qualify as cyberpunk because it's too far into the future. But it's if it's not cyberpunk, then it's starpunk, because darn it, the idea is there. It's just there's more planets involved than Earth.
That sounds like elitist claptrap to me.
Yeah, I know, but they're very touchy about it. It's kind of funny how upset they get when you start trying to do cyberpunk and it isn't like 20 years down the road. But yeah, so Contractor Wars, Myrmidons Inc. Herbicide is the first in what is tentatively planned for 9 novels in that setting, 3 of which Quincy's writing, and then we're probably going to finish the bunch of them off together. And then I do the We Dare anthology.
Which we love.
The We Dare anthologies, I've done 4 of them so far. They basically come out every spring, and there's a theme for each one. I actually edited an anthology before I'd ever published a novel, which is apparently not the way to do it, but I did it anyway because I messaged Chris. Before I even jump into that, how did I become part of CKP? It's basically kind of like what Casey was saying. Went to LibertyCon in 2017, went to the book release party for A Fistful of Credits, which was the 3rd book out, even though it's the officially the 5th in the series. Early on, the order of release got kind of goofy, and so I bought it because it had a cool robot on the cover, and went looking through the stories, recognized a couple of the names. Jason Cordova was easy to spot because he had green hair at the convention. And as I was arriving at the book release party, he was leaving. He signed his story in my copy. I went in, immediately got awkward. Rob Howell introduced himself, told me all about Sheeran, his fantasy setting, which became Eldros Legacy. And Chris offered me a beer. I declined because I don't drink beer. And then I kind of looked around and went, I don't know who any of these people are. I think that's Casey talking to, I don't know who in the corner. Turns out it was Marissa. I had no idea at the time. And and then I kind of bailed because I'm not good at small talk, and this was my first convention ever. But after leaving, like I had read all of A Fistful of Credits, Cartwright's Cavaliers, and Asperan Solutions by the time I touched down back home in BC, and immediately messaged Chris and was like, "Hey, are you accepting unsolicited short stories for anthologies from new guys who don't know what they're doing?" And Chris was like, "Maybe, depends on if it's any good." So the Yvonne says she met me that night. I don't remember that, Yvonne. I'm sorry. It's just like there's like it's
Yes.
The Liberty
just
Con
kind
blur.
of weird, right? Like that. I don't remember that there's a time before where I didn't know who Yvonne was. It was just like either I did or I didn't. I don't know. But yeah, so I sent Chris an idea for a bunch of Caspers that were more or less Navy SEALs, and then that story got into Luck is Not a Factor, and that's how I got started with CKP.
And Quincy, how'd you come aboard?
Well, so on the CKP side, basically, I had gone to Liberty Con 1 year before I really got to know CKP and what Chris was doing. And that's because I'd actually been involved with Larry Correa and the Monster Hunter Files anthology that he put out. That's one of my few sort of claims to fame. That story was really well received, so I was already aware of Liberty Con and was there. And then while I was there, I happened to meet Mark Stallings, and we got to talking. And then over the course of the following year, I was going back, of course. And that's when he said, "Hey, Quincy, you should be working with these guys. You should write. Why don't you submit a story?" He really was fairly insistent repeatedly. And so I was like, okay, fine. So I took a look, and I was like, yeah, this is some really good stuff. And started with, I believe it was, I think, the second or the third of the Four Horsemen anthologies. It might have actually been the Peacemaker one. I can't remember. I'd have to look it up, because I've been in, I don't know, 9, 12, a number of the anthologies, maybe 8. Anyway. And then actually after at that point, once I'd written for them, I forget how Jamie and I connected.
No idea.
Yeah, I honestly don't know. I'm like him. I'm not a social person. I'm not. I'm more of a recluse. And I love talking about very specific topics that interest me, but you get off into the small talk, and my eyes glaze over.
You know what? I think we didn't really know each other until the first We Dare, and because We Dare was so new, and like I didn't know what I was doing, but Chris was like, "It's okay. There's all kinds of pros who know what they're doing and write good stories, and you're not going to have to work very hard. So here's a list of guys that maybe you should hit up to get stories from." And then when I was talking to you about your story for We Dare, you started off with, because the theme was augmented humanity, you started off with, well, I'd like to do a story about like Island of Dr. Moreau, but in the future with like some kind of genetic component to it. And I was like, well, let me tell you about the genies in Myrmidons. and then we talked a whole lot more, and boom, like the magic happened.
Yeah,
cool.
It's been sort of rocking and rolling ever since. So yeah, that got me involved with Herbicide. I've written I wrote one novel with Kevin Eikenberry. I wrote, it was the first Horrent novel. It was the first Horrent novel released, the second in the chronology.
Yes, after Cordova Relate.
Yep. We had a blast writing that, Ike and I. So I really am pleased with how that book turned out. That one's a lot of fun. All of my other work that's been published through CKP has been in the anthologies. Like I said, there's quite a few in the Four Horsemen universe. I've written in Salvage Title, We Dare, obviously. I think I have 3. I'm in 3 of the 4 anthologies, if I recall correctly.
Yeah.
And then a couple of others. So I've done a lot of work there. And then ultimately, this was a couple years ago, give or take. Rob Howell and I were talking about fantasy and how impressed we were with how Kennedy and Mark Wandry had done what they were doing with the Four Horsemen universe and this, sort of spreading the wealth, so to speak, and the creativity. And Rob and I, we just sort of said, hey, it seems to me you could do the same thing with a fantasy shared world. Why don't we do that? And then, the conversation dies off. Months pass. And then it was at it was actually in Kennedy's living room, as I recall, at the Factory Con 3 years ago. I don't remember. It's all a blur. COVID is a blur. Anyway, and was like, we should really do this. He reached out to me in January then, not this year, but the previous year. And then over the course of 2 months, we pulled in Mark Stallings, Marie Whitaker, Todd Fonestock to get the core 5, created the partnership we've been running with. And then, of course, as incestuous as this, the writing group is, I mean, we're all talking, we're all co-authoring, we're all in everybody else's sandboxes. We've naturally brought in a bunch of the people from Salvage Title, from Four Horsemen Universe, from Valkyries. It's all just coming together. So it really is. I'm part of the sort of the factory floor. I haven't been as prolific as I would have liked. For various reasons, but I should have 3 books published this year. So I'm kind of getting back on track. Yeah. I had, Seeds of Dominion. That was my first attempt in Eldritch Legacy. That came out in February. In June, I had a non-CKP novel come out called Paladin's Light, which is co-authored with Mark Allen Adelheid. And then I'm about to wrap up Cradle and All, which is the companion novel of Jamie's Myrmidons. And then I'll finish my second Eldritch Legacy novel. Well, it has to be done by pretty much September 30th. So, and then that'll get released in January of next year. Yeah, January of next year. So, yeah, I'm just cranking them out now.
That's awesome. Yeah. Marisa got into CKP much like Casey did through Girl Casey, and she drug her in kicking and screaming, and here we are. So talking about anthologies, it's one of the reasons why we're here. Now CKP does a lot of anthologies, or has done a lot of anthologies, and y'all have been a part of a lot of them. What do you like? What's the benefit of the anthologies? What have you enjoyed about them? Go ahead. Who's first? Jamie, you go.
I'll start. I actually love the notion of anthologies. Means you can write. I mean, it's quick hits. It's always a different theme, a different setting, at least moderately varied genre. From military sci-fi to hard sci-fi to, well, now we're doing fantasies in the mix, which, it certainly keeps me interested. It's, for me, it's hard to write 100,000, well, usually 120,000 words of a novel because I really have to hunker down and work at it. Short stories I can crank out, usually in a week, unless I'm slacking, which, okay, that happens. But it's nice because it keeps things just sort of different, right? It keeps things fresh, which I love. That works for me.
Yeah, for sure. When I first started writing, and Chris accepted Luck is the story that went into Luck is Not a Factor. I had written a novel that wasn't going to go anywhere. It was more or less fan fiction of John Ringo's Black Tide universe, and I'd written it and was talking to Gary Poole about it, and it's not going anywhere. But that was the first thing that I ever wrote. It took me a year, and then I go off to LibertyCon and find out about short stories and things like this. So what I did was I bought myself a bottle of writer's tears, and for every short story contract that I signed, I would celebrate with a drink. And I figured by the time I reached the end of the bottle, I might know what I'm doing. And it turns out I was halfway through the bottle when Cordova shanghaied me into writing Gunboat with him. So So I didn't make it to the bottom of the bottle before I did that. But I really think for somebody who's new, anthologies and short stories are a fantastic way to practice the craft of storytelling, because you still need to be able to tell an entire story within that 8,000 to 10,000 words, more or less, depending on how strict somebody wants to be. You still need character development, you still need world building, you still need a plot, you still need resolution, you need all these things, and you got to do it all very, very quickly. And so that helps kind of hone things down. And then you write your 10,000 words and you figure out, well, how long did it take me to write that? Was that a month? Was it a week? Was it a weekend? Like, it depends, right? And then the feedback that you get can help you practice for the next one, and the one after that, and the one after that. As far as submitting to an anthology, the trick is to understand that unless you're in tight with the editor and you get approval ahead of time, the guidelines are actually more like rules. It kind of inverts the whole pirate thing, right? Because when, like I've heard, I've never done an open call anthology before. With Rob editing the Valor books, several of them have been open call, right? And so he's had 10-ish stories that he got commitments from other from known contributors, and then a couple of slots, 5 or so, he'll leave open for people to submit to. And he'll get 30 some submissions. So now all of a sudden those 37 people are competing for the top 5 slots. And if you can't stick to the guidelines, you're very quickly going to find yourself getting, bounced out of contention for that spot because you couldn't follow the rules.
Yep.
And so that's, I think, like an essential thing to understand, right? Like, when you're writing a novel, I mean, some people can't even know what a novel is. There's plenty of people who write bang up novels in 75,000 to 80,000 words and rad. Other novels are 150 to 180, and it's just going to depend on who's publishing it and what you're looking to get out of it and what kind of story you're trying to tell. And if you spend a year or 8 months as a new writer writing 180,000 words only to be told no, that can be crushing. Because you haven't understood some of the essentials of what makes for entertaining storytelling, right? And if your story isn't entertaining, then what's the point?
Yeah. Casey, anything to add?
I think they covered a lot of it, but it's sort of like Quincy said, it's a little bit less daunting to know that you're making a 10,000 word 1 week commitment to writing a story. A lot of people really early on think in terms of stories. They think in sort of smaller, shorter terms. Maybe you have an entire novel in your head, but maybe you're not quite right to tackle all the exposition and world building and side plots and all those things that's going to go into 100,000 words, like Quincy said. So you're learning the mechanics, you're learning sentence structure, story structure, character development on a smaller scale that'll help you then expound later. A lot of people sort of err one of two ways. Either they're too short or they're too long of a short story, and 10,000 words being the sort of the standard. Most people erring a little bit too long, honestly. And then what that does for you, it teaches you by holding yourself to that 10,000 word limit or whatever the limit is for your whatever submission you've either been invited to or you're trying to submit for. It teaches you how to laser focus, how to be as brief as possible, how to cut down some of that world building, sort of space out that exposition, all the different things that you need to learn, all the different mechanics that you need to learn that are going to make writing an actual novel later on a lot easier for you. Later on, the short story is really the harder media to try and write for. Sorry.
Because it's so condensed.
It's all good.
So it is kind of the more because you have to be laser focused. You have to learn how to set your beats, get your story in, get it done in that tiny word limit. Later on, I wrote my first couple short stories and they were 11,000, 12,000 words, and then I had to go back and edit until I got down to my limit. Later on, when I'd gotten some experience, I was surprised when I had a story that I was happy with, where I told everything that I wanted to do, and it was like 7,200 words or something like that. And it was like I sort of nailed that time for that space that I had to work with. Then going on to a novel, you're allowed to do all the things that you had just taught yourself not to do in a story, because you can't spend your time talking about how this was happening on this continent, or this is what happened to this guy's childhood. And now you're allowed to do all those things, and you find that you've just written 50,000 words and gotten halfway through your novel and you didn't realize it was happening. And so you're like, wow, I can do this. It's a little bit less daunting to write a novel now, because I'm not worried about the mechanics. I'm not worried about breaking all the rules that I didn't know before, head hopping, using too many adverbs. I don't know. There's lists of them, and you can fall into a lot of traps. So all of them, you can't write anything, but you do have to learn how to pick and choose which stories to write and which stories, and which pieces, which rules to follow, and which rules that you can still tell a good story and ignore. So short stories are the great place to get that. And also marketing wise, short stories are a great way to get your name out there. And maybe start getting yourself known to publishers, getting you on their radar. So when you present them with a novel later, they're like, oh yeah, I remember you had a good short story in that anthology we did. Let me take a look at it. It's not just going to be something that they dump at the bottom of the slush pile. It's like, thanks, I'll put it over there. I'll get back to you in 3 years.
When I've been selecting people for the media anthologies, I try to include one or two relatively new people, even though I'm not doing the slush pile thing. And if I've seen one or two stories that shows real promise, and I know that that's one of the first things that the person has written, then I'll be like, hey, come play and we dare and write me a story about blah bounty hunters or badass ladies of sci-fi or survivors of the end of the world or whatever. And yeah, it is absolutely great advertising for you to advertise to other editors and other publishers, to say, hey, this is the story that I published already.
Well, and it's good for CKP, because it's kind of like a farm league. You can see how people write and all that before you commit to a novel, unless they have a novel already that you're purchasing. But it's a good farm league, because that's how Marisa got in, was through anthologies. So anthologies, that kind of goes into you're writing in a shared universe, and all of you have written in shared universes. So what's that like? Because it's you're writing original stories, but you have to follow the parameters of someone else's vision. So kind of tell me what that's like for you.
Well, there's pros, obviously. I'll start off with the cons, because they're sort of obvious, in that you have to really know that universe. You have to dig into their Bible. Four Horsemen specifically, you can be in a lot of danger if you try and write something without reading a lot of it, at least if you want to be intricately or somewhere deeply tied into the plot. If you haven't read a lot of it, and there's a lot to read, it's hard to know where you're crossing lines, though that's really a little bit is covered by the fact that the Chris Kennedy and Mark Wandry, the people who own that universe, will try and cover that, or their editors are trying and cover the places where you cross some line that or contradict something they didn't want you to contradict. But that's sort of that's the con. You have to hold yourself to the rules of that universe. You can't touch certain characters. You can't you can't cross into certain plot lines that they've developed. You have to find your niche. On the other hand, the big pro is that it's established for you. You don't have to do as much world building as you would need to do otherwise. The rules are laid out for you. You can take yourself from where that universe has already established itself, find your niche in there, build your story from there, and not have to worry that the reader is going to be lost if you create, for the all the things that have already been created behind you.
Yeah, in a sense, writing in a shared universe in somebody else's setting, it's coloring inside the lines, right? You can make a glorious piece of art inside somebody else's lines, and the trick is that you haven't decided where the lines are going. No artificial gravity. Yes, for
no
example.
FTL drives or yes, FTL drives, right?
Right.
There are
Yeah.
rules.
Because I knew this question was coming, I went looking because I just read this in the new Writer Dojo Facebook group. Somebody was talking about canon, and when you're writing in a shared universe, thou shalt respect the canon. Canon it's the history of the story, it's the laws of physics, it's everything that makes the story real. And even if you're writing about these characters over here and somebody else has written about those characters over there, and then the series creator has written about these characters here, the canon are the threads that tie it all together, right? Without canon, green kryptonite is just a pretty rock, because some writers just no, like that's not going to bother Superman near as much as it might. The example that the author of the post wrote was talking about without canon, we don't know why James T. Kirk hates Klingons the way that he does. When you break canon or you disregard it, you can make your story irrelevant and forgotten at best, or worse, it can be hated by the very people who ought to love what you're doing and then throw you money because they want to buy your stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, to kind of talk about anthologies and canon stuff, my biggest experience with that was when I was working on Freehold Resistance with Mad Mike Williamson. In the credits, he credited me as his deputy assistant editor in charge of continuity and stuff. He didn't have a universe Bible, and for the Forged in Blood stories, you kind of knew what happened before, but Forged in Blood was told over a period of like 1,000 years, with this same sword passing from hand to hand to different warriors through the generations, until it wound up in Kendra's hand at the Battle of Braided Bluff at the end of Freehold, and then it even went off into the future to parts of the story that Mike had never written about before. But when we tried to do Resistance, we were trying to fill in the blanks around the story of Freehold and around the story of the weapon. And I had gone through the main books from the main 3 that covers the war against Earth. And I'd made copious notes and timeline and figured out, like, okay, if this happened here and it's been this many weeks since that, and then this happened over here, then that means that this was winter when this happened, right? And so I drew up a timeline that and major events that happen over the course of the books. And so when I was doing that because I wanted to pitch to Mike that I wanted to write a combat leopard novel, and what ended up happening is we did the anthology with it. And one of my favorite reviews of all time is one where somebody wrote, I have a great deal of free time, so given the challenge of seeing how Resistance fell within the Freehold world, I went back and read everything in the series. To my chagrin, I really, really looked for holes and could not find even one that did not fit within the series. Whoever was the master behind keeping track of this is owed a drink by me when we meet, as they pulled off a hell of a damn good job. And I'm like, because that was the goal, and Mike and I had a couple of arguments along the way, like, no, this story has to go here in order for it to slot, because this then follows and blah, blah, blah. And we had a couple of arguments, but then I was able to back it up with his own words. And that clearly was appreciated by the people who care about things like the established universe and canon and the timeline. And I think when you're working in a setting and in a series, being able to say, okay, this is a universe and it has parts that already exist, I need to respect them. It's huge. And really what it is it's showing your respect for the work that's gone before. So I mean, if Chris or Mark wanted to, have somebody develop artificial gravity, first of all, people's minds would be blown. But
calls,
and they totally could do that, and I think people would be very surprised. But I think they could totally get away with it because it's theirs. If somebody just started writing about artificial gravity and threw it in there and it slipped by without anybody noticing, people would be like, that doesn't fit.
Yeah.
And it would not be received anywhere near the same way.
Quincy, anything to add?
Well, we've talked about there's a notion of craft and respecting what's come before. I think there's also, as a writer who wants to sell books, and actually as part of a partnership that wants to sell a lot of books from a lot of different people. When you enter into a shared world, or even if you have an IP that becomes intellectual property that becomes very well known, Star Trek, Star Wars, and I'm going to use a Star Wars example here in a second. There is, as you gain momentum and as you gain fans and you gain devoted people who, there's in the genre sort of readership, and I'm one of them. There's a little bit of we'll call it spectrum, right? It's you pay attention to the details, and those details are important. I do that. And so ultimately, this relationship IP owners have with the fans is symbiotic. The fans feed the IP feeds the fans. And as long as the IP owners, the creators, respect what the fans know, right? And like there's historians who know U.S. history inside and out. Fans know Star Trek inside and out. They know Star Wars inside and out. We hope someday they will know Eldros Legacy inside and out. We are taking special care, painstakingly, to make sure that we get the timelines right, that the characters aren't in two places on the same day, these sorts of things. To give you a perfect example, and this has nothing to do with whether you liked the movies or didn't like the movies, it's beside the point. It's the second of the new Star Wars movies. What is it, The Last Jedi? Mm-hmm. Which is basically a running out of gas story. One, never before in, 7 films did anybody ever mention starships could run out of gas. One. In 7 films before that, and all of the books, laser beams, laser blasts, turbo lasers in space always go straight because no gravity well. That's basic physics. Of course, in this running out of gas scene, you have laser blasts lobbing in as if they were being fired from old pirate ships. The reason the old fans didn't like that was because the creators chose or didn't get, I don't know which, that they broke the universe. Now, to fans who were not indoctrinated into all that had come before, wow, this is great, this is fun, it's cool. Okay, I get that. But that's why so many people were pissed off, was because the people who chose to create the new didn't really pay attention, I think, in many respects, to what had come before. And ultimately, Star Wars, the property, Disney, in many respects, they made a lot of money, but they paid for that in bad press, in lower movie sales than they otherwise could have had. If they'd paid attention to the old stuff, they would have picked up new fans and carried the old along. And I think it's important in a shared universe for the owners and all the writers to pay attention to that, because it can become expensive in the long run if you don't, because you lose people who get angry because you basically have spit in their eye.
No, because it's. Wait, do I?
Can you put up Yvonne's comment there?
What I miss?
Yes.
Don't pee on the can.
Amen. That's
absolutely true, Yvonne. We appreciate you so much.
Yeah, it's a relationship, and you have to respect the relationship, or poop goes sideways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and speaking of Disney and everything, I've noticed it. I mean, even with like the new Kenobi show and stuff, they're just shoehorning stuff in there, and you know, it's I saw this meme where from the first Star Wars movie, or whichever one where Vader is facing Obi-Wan, is like for the last time. This is last time, except for that time I saw you on this planet, a couple years back, and you look way too old compared to that movie. Just
what
this
happened to you?
ongoing meme. So next thing, y'all already kind of touched on it, the genre fluidness. We want to talk about the different genres within sci-fi and fantasy, and to kick it off, Yvonne, the commenter galore says Casey writes really good romance. I didn't know
That's
that.
it. I'm gonna have to hook up with some of that.
But I mean, just let's talk about the different genres in sci-fi or fantasy, and what y'all have done in those genres, and things like that.
I think that's what kind of caught me off guard when the sticklers in some of these cyberpunk groups got a little annoyed that, wait a minute, you've got aliens? That's not cyberpunk. I'm like, okay. I mean, no, it isn't 20 minutes into the future cyberpunk. It isn't cyberpunk 2077. But it is cyberpunk 2635, and we have mega corporations, we have contractors like Shadowrunners that go and pick fights between the corporations. We have an all oppressive system that is able to reach out and crush people, which we haven't really even touched on yet in either of our two first books, me and Quincy. But the follow-up book that I'm 36,000 words into, Myrmidons Inc. Disavowed, and getting into that whole pervasive surveillance and pervasive control. One of the things that came to mind when I was writing it was, when we have a entirely digital currency society, they can turn your bank account off. And I wrote that a year ago, and then the Canadian government did it to a bunch of protesters back in February, and that was a little bit of a, oh, here we are, okay, we're into cyberpunk now, this is awful. So I mean, I like cyberpunk. I like the noun punk genres in particular, because they are intrinsically like outsider stories fighting back against cruel and capricious and uncaring. They're underdog stories in a sense, and that's really coming through in a big way in what I've read of Quincy's novel as well. The issue from Herbicide of whether or not Selena even qualifies as human is a huge deal in Quincy's story, because the vast majority of his characters are genies like Selena, and so they are locked out of the system and they are forced to operate on its fringes, and that to me is very punk. And if it's not cyberpunk, then I'm going to call it starpunk, and I'm going to make a logo and stuff, and we're going to call it that.
I'm down with that. We'll get t-shirts made up, man. It'll be great.
Yes. Genre fluid. Got it.
There we go. And you know what? Casey actually had a fantastic story in We Dare 4. It's one of the best pursuits I've ever read. Begins and ends in a strip joint, and there's lots of shooting, and we get to see what happens when you dial up a gravity drive too high in close proximity to solid mass, and the havoc that it wreaks. And the story itself is hysterically fun. And at some point, I'm gonna yank Casey over and get him to start writing novels about the witch doctor too. So yes, it's all recruiting. This is another thing that happens with anthologies, is you start recruiting people, and you're like, hey, yo, come play in my box.
That's a good point. I mean, in the anthologies, as both editors and writers who have shared worlds, you get to hear a voice. Right, in each story you read, every voice is different, but some of those voices resonate with a specific property. Right, this is the vision I have for, this is the vision we have for Eldritch Legacy, right? And so, in that regard, we're looking for, I don't want to say certain kinds of stories, but voices that will give us both diversity and a consistency of storytelling. But I mean, in the We Dare, there's a lot of that. Certainly in the Four Horsemen, there's a lot of that. So
For sure.
you know, it really is helpful to go through the anthologies because you can see who writes like you and what's going to work if you have an idea for a bigger, a bigger storyline.
Yeah. And sometimes like a story will just grab you right from the first sentences and you'll be like, okay, I want to hear more, right? The first two sentences in Vocational Rehab, Casey's story, is, let me be blunt, recruiters lie. And it's like, there, we're speaking to every veteran anywhere since like the Roman Empire, right? Like it's universal, and people get that, I think. And so, you can grab your audience, and suck them in when the reader realizes this guy's speaking my language. So, yes, that caught me right off the bat when I got Vocational Rehab in my inbox. It was fantastic.
To on what Quincy was saying, and something we didn't really, maybe we didn't touch on anthologies. Every now and then I can't hear so well, but that could be stepping stones to novels in that universe. It sort of lets you, if it's a universe specific anthology, you get to play in that universe, you create characters, you create a new world. And while that's happening, the writer brain is inevitably going to say, what else is going to happen from that? What do I want to do with that?
What happens next?
Yeah. What happens next? I need to write about these people more. Maybe there'll be another anthology where I can write another short story, or I could just write the novel about where I think this is going, or maybe where it came from, and it can kind of sort of a spiral from there. So that's one of those things. That's another thing that we about the anthology is they can be stepping stones to writing the novels about what you just wrote a short story on. You got that small.
And to clarify, in this circle under CKP, whenever anybody says, "Yeah, I'm going to write a novel," what they don't understand is that they actually mean trilogy.
Yes.
I was about to say, like,
that's how that works.
If you find yourself writing a salvage short story, down your neck for the first in the trilogy very soon.
Yeah, well, so I got basically it was my first We Dare story. I'm going to get basically the trilogy out of that for you. My Vorwall story for Steverson, I still owe him books on that. I just haven't gotten to them. There's actually, it was the story I wrote. I forget which one it was called, but Kennedy really liked it. It was one of the few that he remarked upon. And I think it's Miranda's Last Dance. And it's about this old retired archangel. He was basically a battlesuit pilot. And he's retired. He has this little whiskey distillery. And some pirates land and try to take over his digs. And he doesn't take kindly to it. And proceeds to kick the shit out of everybody. And that was a story that resonated, I think, with Kennedy, and that's one I do want to get back to. It was a neat world, and that one just sort of spilled out of me. I don't get lucky like that often, but that's what happens: is you get a story that clicks, and the readers want more. You want to write more. You just have to find the time to do it, which sucks.
Yeah, that's always the trick. Is either you're like screaming because you can't get the words on the page, or you're screaming because you have so many more words you want to be writing at the same time.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, like I'm going to be working on Contractor Wars, and I'm going to be working on my Eldros Legacy trilogy, and I need to write at least two more in Fallen World. But I also know that I want to write a salvage trilogy about Charlie Foxtrot Solutions, and the characters from my short story there, and there's other stuff that I want to do, and it just can't happen fast enough.
Yeah.
So it's tricky, and one of the things about working with CKP is you're never gonna want for work as long as you're keen. Somebody's always gonna be like, hey, so what about this? Or Casey will pop by with a hey, and then off you go.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, what do you want?
Yeah.
As soon as
that's magic superpower.
That parallel universe where we can step aside, do all our writing, and come back in the same time that we left, I'll let you guys in on. Okay. I might market it, and I might charge a fee.
But one of to kind of get back to the question about subgenres, one of the things that I'm really keen about Eldros Legacy in particular is doing such a large and shared universe means that you can fit multiple subgenres within the setting even. You know, some people write epic where you've got 9 different points of view and you've got huge battles, you know, between enormous armies and there's tens of thousands of casualties and cities are burned and all this kind of thing. Or you can come into like Swords and Sorcery, where it's like, you know, your plucky band of mischief-making adventurers, you know, and that sort of thing. With my Kadarin trilogy, it's going to be like military fantasy. The first story is more or less commando, you know, behind enemy lines raid, followed by, you know, mountain warfare played pretty straight, followed by a siege. And so we're going to kind of move through different phases of warfare, but it's all going to be military fantasy starring a bunch of anthropomorphic coyotes. So it's a little out there, but you know, each different founder and the different continents and the different authors, they're all going to be able to bring their own style. And so even if you know, one particular book doesn't do it for you, you know, there's going to be a dozen more to pick from, and other characters and other storylines you can follow, and that's, you know, I think one of the real strengths of CKP's shared worlds. You know, whether we're talking about Salvage or we're talking about Four Horsemen or we're talking about Eldros or we're talking about anything else, you get a chance to kind of pick your flavor, you know, and you'll know the setting, you'll understand some of the canon, and then away you go.
You'll know the magic system.
Yeah.
Hmm. Well, so you talked about how busy y'all can get once you put out good work. They want you to do more good work. So what is so you can get all your stuff out that you want? What's your writing process? What, you know, how do you get it done?
Well, are you a pantser or a plotter? Because I don't even know.
For me, it varies from project to project. I'm finding sometimes, I think the methodology that I've settled on now is that while I'm working on one project, I'm stewing over 2 or 3 others. I'm trying to like spell them out, do like outlines sort of in my spare time or when I have the ability or when I take a few brain bites to step aside from the main project I'm working on, spell it out that way. But once I actually hit a project, I've gotten to the point where I just need to go full bore on it in terms of I have an average daily word count I'm trying to make. I can plan out how long a novel is going to take. I allot that time in front of me. And then as long as I'm hitting my word count, so I'm not creating too much pressure on myself with all my outside, you know, real life and job and everything, I plan out that timeline when I'm going to work on a main project. When I hit that main project, I have to be ready to go. I've got to have the characters, the beats, the outline laid out before me so I can just keep moving with it. And that's where I've gotten tripped up a couple times when I try to charge into one of those projects without having done that. So, like I said, it's sort of like this sort of overlapping timeline theme where 6 months out, I'm 2 projects away from that project. So I start ideas, I start building in a little bit of an outline, as sort of like a side project while I'm going full bore on one project. And then I'm trying to flesh out the next project as much as I can, scenes, beats, and things like that. So.
Yeah, what I've found most recently worked for me, and I mean I really allowed myself to get derailed a couple of times. You know, I was halfway through Herbicide when Woods asked me to write Shogun, and I did, and then I came back to it, and then I was actually simultaneously working on Herbicide and Unshackled, which is why they were only released a month apart. But the process that seems to work best for me is I start with a rough outline, which actually looks basically like a spreadsheet that I've got set up where I fill in the blanks. I figure out my characters. I figure out some character traits. You know, write like almost like a D&D character background. I'll write like what has come before, And then, the high points, the low points, like Casey said, the beats of the story. And that's my rough outline. And then as I started working on Kadarin, for the first time ever, I tried dictating. And while I'm useless for dictating prose, dictating outline is fantastic, because it's just like stream of consciousness blathering, and it works. I can just go and, if I've actually, like, I blah, 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 into the recorder, and then on the drive back, I do, I live like an hour from the closest major town up here in New Brunswick, and I remember the one time I had to drive Michelle for an MRI in Moncton, which is 3 hours away. I dictated for 3 hours on the way there, dictated for an hour and a half on the way back, talked about what I'd said with Michelle afterwards, came up with a better ending, and then dictated that too. And then I just I used Dragon to transcribe all of my blather into something that's semi-legible. It's a disaster when you start throwing in like fantasy words and fantasy races and stuff that isn't standard issue English. But it worked like crazy, because then I could take those little sections and be like, all right, this comes next, this comes next, this comes next. This is like when we're talking about like grinding out the middle of the book, I knew what had to happen. And so then I take all that and I plug it into Scrivener. And Scrivener is my go-to for my first draft. And then last week, basically, I outputted my final manuscript into Word on Friday, and then I had a process that I did for my edits. Like, I've got a list of words that I know are problematic. Began, started, had been, those sorts of things. I literally do like word searches for those, and then find ways to rearticulate them. This time I used Word to read my story aloud to me, which took like 4 days. But that was brilliant. That was awesome, being able to have, like, it doesn't skip any words. It doesn't, pronounce what I thought I wrote. It pronounces what I wrote. And that's helped me find words that were spelled right, but were the wrong word, that sort of thing. And then at the end, I just ran it through a spell check, and that finished it up and sent it off to Quincy for his approval, because canon matters.
Yeah. Well, and so I'm 2 chapters in on the review. Really good stuff. I'm stoked. I'd read a sort of a pre-draft a couple of months ago, which I loved, but now it's nice to see all the pieces and everything congeal. And I did try the text to word on Microsoft Word, and it has come a long way. I was astonished at
it's amazing, isn't it?
There's inflection in there. It's not real heavy, but it's there.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to be using that on mine.
Statements sound like statements. It's wild.
Yeah, it gets it right. And then if you've got multiple clauses in a sentence, it does those properly as well. I mean, I was like, holy crap, this thing works. So I will be using that when I wrap up mine. I'm close to wrapping up my novel for Jamie. It's called Cradle and All. On a back topic, we were talking about story lengths and stories becoming sort of turning into novels. Cradle and All was the short story I wrote. There was a draft that was 17,000 plus words that I don't think Jamie saw. Or no, maybe I did show it to you. I said, dude, I'm here, and I got to trim something out.
I think we got it down to about 15.
And again, I went
your
long.
story and mine were the 2 longest in the book, because my universe, my anthology, I can do what I want.
Yeah.
But
that's
where the rules become guidelines again.
Kennedy will tell you I'm notorious for this. He remarks upon it every now and again, and I apologize, but it's okay. Those are the words that came out of my brain. I'm sorry. But I frequently go past the 11,000, 10,000 mark. 11, 12. There's been a couple of longer than that. Anyway, as far as the process, though, I'm definitely a plotter. I will outline a novel, although my outlines aren't sort of really what you would traditionally call an outline, because they're divided by chapters. There are the bullet points of what happens, but there's also, you'll find dialogue in my outlines. This is something that has to be said. I mean, my head sort of rolls like a movie reel inside my skull. And that just spills out onto the outline portion. Now, 90% of that gets kept, maybe 10% will get kicked out. What I've recently learned, and this is thanks to Todd Fonestock, who is one of the founders in Eldritch Legacy. He is our guru with regards to saving the cat, which is we'll call it an outline or a plotting strategy or process. And he's kind of gotten the rest of us on board with that. So I had started doing my outline, layering that or matching it up to this beat sheet that is part of Save the Cat. I did that on the second novel that I'm working on in Eldritch Legacy, which is called The Demons of Venkal. And that really helps you make sure that you're hitting your A story, your B story, the emotional beats. We throw that word around. But I'm absolutely a plotter. My short fiction, not at all. I'll just sit down and write a short story and see what happens. But my novels, I have to. And even with the plotting that I do and the outlining that I do, by the time I'm done writing, there's probably 20% that shows up in the manuscript that wasn't in the outline. I recently had a situation like that with Cradle and All for Jamie, where there was these 2 chapters that turned into about 5. I'm like, well, crap, in order to get there, I have to do this. I have to put this in. Or if I do that, there's something that naturally has to happen after that I didn't really think about. And that happens mid-process, and there's nothing you can do about it but write it and then hope the editor doesn't say, this is ridiculous, get rid of it, which happens. But yeah, the plotting is, for me, it's the only way I can get to the finish line. I will say that generally with that outline, when I used to not do it, I can get to the finish line much more quickly because I don't sit there looking at the screen wondering what the hell am I going to write. I know what I have to write. I just have to write it. And for my headspace, that makes a big difference. It really does. And it'll keep me on track. Now, it means also usually that I will work 10-hour days for a month to finish a novel. Which drives my wife crazy. God bless her. She's been very patient with this whole writing thing and continues to be supportive. But there's a toll. Is that once you get going, if you don't keep momentum, it can stall out, and that can sometimes be a problem.
I'm surprised that all 3 of us are plotters that way. I figured at least one of us. I mean, I was suspected Casey might be, but talking to people who are pantsers drives me nuts because they're like, I just write up the after action report of what the people in my head do, and I'm like, how does this work, right? And the thing is, I think pantsers who write very well have an instinct for storytelling that
yes.
That is like, it's an incredible talent.
Steverson is one of them.
Steverson's one of them. Absolutely.
Yeah, I hate him.
But you can also get that from his personality. Talking to him, he is a storyteller.
Well, yeah. So
start talking,
and that's what I mean. Like, it comes to him. It comes to him naturally. And
yeah, he writes a draft and he's done.
And he'll naturally build the tension and work towards the final huzzah. And he doesn't need to think about it. He just puts one word after the other. Yeah. And it drives me nuts. But,
it's so not fair.
It isn't. But
all right, guys. Casey's got to head out.
Oh,
okay.
Time out for a second. Casey's got to go out. I want him to plug anything he wants to plug before he leaves. What books do you have coming up?
Let me throw my 2 cents into the conversation we were having, and then I'm kind of a little bit back and forth of a plotter and a pantser. I'm starting to edge more towards plotting the more that I fall on my face trying to pants in the rushed writing sprint mode that I have developed now. I kind of now have to plot. Like previously, I did most of my work pantsing, to be honest. But now I've found that if I'm not plotting, I can't do those sprints effectively and write what I wanted to write in time frame. So I'm going to say evolving in that direction. Real quick, like I said, I think I haven't really. I wrote largely in the Four Horsemen universe. You can find me in the places on social media we talked about. So I've got 5 books in the Four Horsemen. I do have a Fallen World novel that has just come out. That's just gone to.
Congrats.
Woods for review. Waiting on that. We'll see what happens. Set at the Air Force Academy. Based on my short story from Among the Embers. Again, that was my short story that spiraled into a novel. I'm currently working on another Four Horsemen universe. Two more, actually, a Debit novel, and then one more Bull novel. Once I do that, I want to get back into JTF13 with Three Ravens Publishing. Sorry, Chris, but just had to make that plug. It did just win an award for Best Historical Fiction, and I just finally listened to the audio on it. Found out that it was missing an entire chapter, which is awesome. But it sort of made me hungry to go back and write my Civil War Marines again, just because I'm very, very deeply proud of the history that I wove into that novel. Beyond that, I've also got a slew of short stories. I went into LibertyCon thinking that I had 2 novels I was going to write by the end of the year and maybe a short story or 2. And now I've realized I've got about 8 short stories and 2 novels and a collaborative novel, maybe sort of in the background. So sort of grown out a little bit, but I'll got those goals to finish all those things by the end of the year, then get back into JTF 13. And then there might be another super secret project that I'll be on a part of in the future. We'll see what comes of that, but I'm not going to spill any of that yet.
Cool.
All righty. Thank you very much. Sorry to leave a little bit.
Thanks for coming on, man. I know you got to go.
Always a pleasure.
See you guys. Thank you.
Later, buddy. All right. So we're over an hour now. Let's go ahead and do the same thing for you guys. Quincy, what do you have coming up? Where can people see you? Appearances, all that good stuff.
Well, so let me replug the 2 novels that I had come out this year. The first one was Seeds of Dominion, which is the second book released in the Eldros Legacy property. It is the first book in my series. Just so you know, there's basically the 5 founders. Those 5 stories, like in the Marvel Cinematic Universe Endgame thing, we're all doing the 5 story streams that will, at the end, after about 8 or 9 books each, meet into one big throw the ring into Mount Doom Frodo moment. So that's my first one. It's part of the Legacy of Deceit sort of sub-series. So take a look at that, but also let me plug Todd Fonestock's book, Kaivan the Unkillable, which is where we started. That was the first one out last December. It is really good. Mine's really good too, but his is fast-paced, action-packed. Todd's a fantastic writer, so give that a check. And then there's 5 others in the Eldros Legacy, and Jamie's should be coming out, we think, this year. So keep an eye out for that. Also, which is not related to CKP, in June, released the 3rd in a trilogy that I wrote with Mark Allen Adelheit. The book is called Paladin's Light. The first book was Reclaiming Honor, then Forging Destiny, then Paladin's Light. It's been very well received. With Paladin's Light, we just got, what's the phrase, an Amazon something author. It was really well received, and we did very well with it. The series is fantastic. It's about a young dwarf who's a pariah in his society. It is one part of Adelheit's larger universe called one of the Last War novels. And we're really proud of that story and how it evolved. So take a look at that. And then also just, please keep an eye out for when Demon's Event Call comes out, which should be in January. And Cradle and All, which I have no idea when it'll come out. I just have to finish it up, and then we'll get it into the CKP machine after Jamie looks at it. So keep an eye out for all of that, right? And look for me online.
Yeah.
Awesome. Jamie?
Stuff that I've had come out recently, Herbicide, Myrmidons Incorporated Herbicide.
Really good stuff.
One. That came out last September. Unshackled, the novel that I co-wrote with Casey, that came out a month later. In the spring, We Dare Wanted Dead or Alive came out. That's the 4th in the We Dare anthologies. The first anthology was about augmented humanity. The second one, Semper Paratus, Always Prepared, that's the survivors of the apocalypse. The third one, No Man's Land, is kind of like a love letter to the badass ladies of sci-fi, like Ellen Ripley and Sarah Connor and, half the cast of Star Trek and all that kind of thing. So that one came out last year, and then this past May, I think it was May, Wanted Dead or Alive came out. And aside from Semper Paratus, there are Contractor Wars stories, which is the Myrmidon verse, in all three of them. Quincy and I did stories that tailed into each other in the first one, and then Casey Zell and Josh Hayes wrote a pair of stories that the term is called a Rashomon, I think. It's they're braided, they overlap with two different points of view, and that one was fun. That's about a pair basically of runners who are both hired to break into the same Megacorp headquarters and steal the same tech at the same time, and so they're screwing with each other the whole time, and then they end up like escaping together, and it's awesome. They return in No Man's Land, and then I did an origin story for my ship's captain, Mick Mitchell, who pilots the Pandora's Hope. That was in No Man's Land, and then in the most recent one, Quincy, you did your Yakuza story about a cybernetically enhanced ninja dude who's basically like faked his own death and gone on the run, and then gets dragged into the Yakuza. My story in that one was an origin story for Bellerophon, who is the head boss man of Myrmidons Inc. Before he ever got the handle, basically as he's retiring from the Hellenic Marines. Moops' story in there is the pursuit one about the witch doctor. That one is set in a British region of space. And then Matt Navani did a story there as well about a hacker, and he hunts bounties in that he's hunting rogue AIs. So those stories are all, set in the Contractor Wars universe, and we'll be getting more out as soon as Quincy's book is released, and then I'm 36,000 words into my sequel, so I'm hoping that'll be out early next year. And then in the meantime, I just finished A Murder of Wolves, which is my first Eldros Legacy book, and I'm hoping it's well received.
I think it will be.
Coyote Commandos. So I mean, what the hey, right? Yeah, and then more short stories through the year, and then I just counted up like 5 more that are due by the end of 2022 as well. So always moving, always writing.
Yeah. And a reminder to the audience who's watching now and in the future, go to these guys' websites, sign up for their newsletters. It's the best way to keep up with what they're doing. Not only that, you get free stuff. You get free short stories and books. The same thing for Chris Kennedy. If you go to the chriskennedy.com, chriskennedypublishing.com, sign up for the newsletter. You can even be a first reader. That's usually who he sends out new novels who get first readers and people to do reviews and stuff. So you get the benefit of that. So if you like these authors, and I know you do, keep up with them. Go to their website, sign up for their newsletters. Because if you're waiting to see something on Facebook, you might miss something. So go ahead and follow these guys everywhere you can.
I've got 6 reader
so
magnets on
before we head up,
I've got 6 giveaways on my website right now. 2 sci-fi stories, 2 post-apocalyptic, and 2 fantasy stories on my website. You can grab one, grab all, grab whatever floats your boat, and I'm going to be putting up more as I get the rights back to them. I've got one that needs to go up right now, actually.
There you go. Free stuff galore. Go on there. Follow your favorite authors. So before we leave, I'm going to promote what's coming up. Hot off the presses today. I just got this video. They're restarting the Future Books podcast. It's been on hiatus for a while. It's hosted by Randall Willis. And he sits down with best-selling author Kevin Eikenberry to discuss the upcoming relaunch of his critically acclaimed Protocol War series, as well as his new book, The Crossing, through Bain Publishing. He also talks to the factory boss, Chris Kennedy himself, about the August slate of new CKP releases. And I don't want to tell you, and of course he talks to Kevin Eikenberry, and that was just posted today on the CKP YouTube channel, as well as Apple, Spotify, and anywhere you can see podcasts. And this is produced by Sharklight Media. Our buddy Ian Malone is producing this, so go give that a look, and don't forget to like, subscribe, review, all the stuff that really helps us out. Next week on the CKP page, we're going to have another episode of the continuing series, Hit World Valkyries, leading up to the release of the Valkyrie Initiative September 16th. This episode will feature Jordan Como, and if you see a familiar name, she is my niece, so be nice. She is in the anthology coming up. Marisa is she's a brand new author, and she wrote a very good story, but she's going to be in the Valkyries Initiative anthology, and we'll see that interview with her next week. And last but not least, next week, the live show is going to be on Friday the 12th. With the factory boss himself and my lovely wife, Marisa Wolf, launching or a launch party for the Lions Pride that's coming out next Friday. So don't miss that. Come in. Don't know the particulars of that, but you should start seeing ads for that coming up pretty soon. But join us for that live show next week. And with that, fellas, I really appreciate y'all coming on. Jamie, Quincy, anytime you want to come back on, you're more than welcome. If you want to talk about a new projects that are coming out, come on. I'm happy to have you. But I really appreciate you guys, and people, like I said earlier, go check out their websites, check out their books, buy their books,
Yes, please.
and you will not be disappointed. And with that, thanks to everyone for watching. I really appreciate it. Like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
Vaya con Dios.